our last system for the human body is the reproductive system. So how do animals reproduce? Well, there's really only one of two ways, and we've talked about this all year long, right? You either reproduce sexually or asexually. So if it's asexual reproduction, you get genetically identical offspring. It's from the result of mitotic cell divisions. If it's sexual reproduction, the gonads in that particular species produce haploid cells, so either sperm or egg, depending on the gender, right? And that's through meiosis or meiotic cell division. So when that sperm cell fuses with the egg cell, that's when you get the zygote, and that starts undergoing mitotic cell division to grow into the new organism. The offspring are not identical to the parents or each other, but they are similar. Asexual reproduction, it occurs without mating, so it's more efficient, it's quicker. You don't have to find a mate, you don't have to court members of the opposite sex, you don't have to compete against rivals, you don't have to produce gametes, right? That's a lot of energy to devote to that. There are several ways to do this, right? Budding, fragmentation, parthenogenesis. Over here, right, this is SpongeBob laughing about, can you reproduce by budding? I know it cuts my GIFs off when I have to record like this, but budding, right, it's a method of reproduction used by sponges and cnidarians, so corals and anemones. So the mini version of the adult, a bud, grows directly on the body of the adult. When large enough, it breaks off and becomes independent and forms another adult, right? So SpongeBob famously can grow little sponges off of him, right? And so he can bud. Fragmentation occurs when you have an animal that is capable of splitting their bodies apart at specific locations, and each resulting piece can regenerate into the entire thing. Famously, right, starfish can do this. So if they lose a limb, they can split off whatever part they lose. They just regrow the other part. So if any of these animals' bodies are torn off, they're capable of regenerating it. It occurs in animals such as flatworms, corals, sea jellies, brittle stars, things like that. This next one's kind of interesting, parthenogenesis. This is when eggs can develop without being fertilized. So in some species, the offspring are haploids. They only have half of the number of chromosomes. So this happens with bees, right? So male honeybees develop from unfertilized eggs. Females develop from fertilized eggs. This also happens in some species of aphids, right? So insects over here that you can see. So opposite of that, right, is sexual reproduction. This is less efficient. It takes much longer. It takes more energy, but more animals use it. So why would evolution favor it, right? Why would we evolve to have this instead of just all asexual reproduction? So there's not an exact answer, right? We can't go back in time and ask, why this was going on. But it seems likely because genetic variation was favorable at the time that this developed. So an individual's sex is determined by the type of gametes it produces, right? So the testes, the male gonads produce small haploid sperm, and the ovaries are the female gonad. They produce large haploid eggs, very large cells. The eggs contain lots and lots of food reserves, lots of cytoplasm. They are much, much larger. Much larger. So 10 million times larger in humans, right? Egg cells are way bigger than sperm cells. Just to show you this, the human egg cells are so big you can actually see them with the naked eye, right? You can see the little white dot right there in the middle. Those are several of them together here. Right? This is a dime for comparison's sake, but your eyes can clearly see that, right, when you get up close to it. So these are visible to the naked eye. That's how big the human egg cells are. Okay, so after fertilization happens, and you've got a zygote, that will develop into an embryo. So this is an offspring in its early stages of development before birth or hatching. The food reserves of the egg cell serve as nourishment for those early cells. Okay, so lots and lots of cytoplasm, lots and lots of stuff for energy. Okay, fertilization, right, is the union of the sperm and the egg cells. We also have species that are hermaphroditic or hermaphrodites. These are species that have, some of them have both gonads. So things like flatworms and snails. There are individuals that have both sperm and eggs. So they still engage in sex with partners if they want to exchange sperm capable of fertilizing their own eggs, or they can fertilize themselves since they have both of them. It is still sexual reproduction. You're not getting identical offspring. But you can try to have a little bit of genetic variation if that is more favorable here. So kind of an interesting one there with the flatworms, right? And then as far as the actual fertilization part itself, one way is external fertilization, so the sperm and the egg cells unite outside of the bodies of the parents. This usually has to happen in water, so gametes are typically released into water, so spawning, okay? If you go and look at these slides, you can see there's a GIF here of this fish dropping a whole bunch of eggs right into the riverbed. The gametes are short-lived, so spawning animals must synchronize their reproductive behaviors. So they have to be at the same time in the same place, right? So we talk about, how the male and female of those fish need to be in the same spot at the same time. How do they know? Well, there's environmental cues, courtship behaviors, right? They have to let each other know that it's time so that everything syncs up properly, okay? And so fish do that, right, in their mating seasons. The Great Barrier Reefs, interesting here, they link their cycle up to the cycles of the moon. So they release their sperm and egg cells into the water during the cycles of the moon. That's what's actually controlling it. You can have external fertilization outside of the water. Frogs are kind of famous for doing this. This is a splendid tree frog, right? You can see the eggs coming out the back here, and as they're coming out, you have the male that is also then depositing the sperm onto those eggs. So that is still external fertilization. Okay, and then we have internal fertilization. So this is where sperm are placed inside of the female's reproductive tract, where the eggs are fertilized. This must have been an early adaptation to terrestrial life, right? We said that external fertilization typically has to happen in water. Well, if you don't live in water and you live on the land because you're a terrestrial animal, you probably had to have this happen pretty quickly, right? Sperm die very quickly if they dry out. So this is probably an early thing to evolve for terrestrial creatures. Copulation is the act of internal fertilization, so the male deposits the sperm into the female's reproductive tract. Some animals do not copulate but still have internal fertilization, so things like salamanders, scorpions, and grasshoppers. So instead of it being directly deposited like that, it's transferred via what's called a spermatophore after a mating dance. And so once again, if you could go and look at this Google Drive version of it, the Google Slides, you'll see that these scorpions are actually dancing back and forth together. Okay, so for all of this to link up, ovulation has to be occurring at the same time that the sperm is deposited. So ovulation is the releasing of a mature egg cell from the ovary of a female. Okay, so they're not always ready to go. The egg cells need to develop and be prepared to potentially be fertilized. It occurs roughly at the same time as sperm are deposited in the female's reproductive tract, since the gametes do not live very long individually. Right? If those aren't synced up, they are not going to make any offspring. Sometimes courtship displays can help synchronize this. The female's bodies of certain species will change, or they'll behave a certain way, which indicates to the males that she is ovulating if you want to reproduce now. In some species like rabbits, interestingly here, right, the act of mating stimulates ovulation. So, you may have heard the phrase like reproduce like rabbits, right? Rabbits are very good at making more rabbits. And that's because the actual act of them copulating is actually causing the ovulation, so it increases the likelihood of reproduction. So rabbits are very good at reproducing, if you've ever heard that before. Okay, so that was just a general overview of most animals. Let's talk here about specifically humans and the human reproductive system. So humans are not able to reproduce at every point during their life cycle, right? That ability begins at puberty, right? This is where the process that results in sexual maturity occurs. Starts roughly between the ages of 10 to 14 in girls and 12 to 16 in boys. Puberty in girls results in breast development, their first menstruation or first period. Their hips will often widen as they get flatter. And you have pubic and underarm hair growth and a moderate growth spurt, so they might get a little bit taller. Puberty in boys results in the growth of the testes, so they will enlarge. Muscular development, so they'll gain some muscle mass. Facial hair, pubic hair, underarm hair, and a deepening of the voice, so the larynx enlarges, which causes the voice to get deeper. What actually triggers puberty is from your brain, right? Your brain maturation. It's releasing hormones, specifically, and the most important one, gonadotropin-releasing hormone, or GnRH, from the hypothalamus. Okay, this stimulates the anterior pituitary, other part of your brain, to produce additional hormones: luteinizing hormone, and follicle-stimulating hormone, LH and FSH. Okay. Even though these hormones derive their name from their functions in females, they also assist in male sexual maturation. So we'll see these again when we're talking about the female reproductive cycles, but they also help indicate to males' bodies it is time to undergo puberty. And then the ones that you're probably most familiar with hearing, testosterone and estrogen. So LH and FSH stimulate the testes to produce testosterone, and then in males and in females for the ovaries to produce estrogen. Those are the hormones that stimulate many of the physical changes that occur during puberty and play major roles in the physiological and behavioral events occurring during a person's reproductive life. So it's not just that testosterone causes these things to happen. It's a messenger, right? Same thing with estrogen. Okay, it is a messenger. It's not necessarily the chemical itself, right? They are hormones, and hormones are messenger chemicals. Okay, so for the male reproductive system, you've got your diagram over here. This is going to include the testes, whose job it is to produce testosterone and sperm. There's going to be a series of glands that secrete substances that activate and nourish sperm, and then finally the tubes that link it all together, right? That store sperm and conduct them out of the body. Sperm are made in the testes. The testes are located in the scrotum, right? The pouch that hangs outside of the main body cavity, which is slightly cooler than body temperature. Each testis is nearly filled with coiled, hollow, seminiferous tubules in which sperm are produced. So you can kind of see over here, right, in this picture, you've got these seminiferous tubules, okay? They all kind of squeeze in together, packed in together. They're very, very long if you were to unwind them, but they're all packed in there like that. And then around those, you got interstitial cells. These help synthesize testosterone, and it's located in the space between the tubules. So kind of in all that here, in between the tubules, you have interstitial cells. Interstitial, by the way, you see that a lot. That just means between, okay? Inside the walls of these seminiferous tubules are two types of cells. You have spermatogonia, which give rise to sperm, and then you have Sertoli cells, which help to nourish the developing sperm and regulate growth. The production of sperm has a name called spermatogenesis, right? Pretty straightforward there. It starts right with a primary spermatocyte and then ends up with secondary spermatocytes and spermatids, right, which are right here. They're not quite fully developed, and then they turn into sperm, right? They have to grow tails, okay? Sperm cells contain little cytoplasm. It's basically just the cell with the genetic information and a tail. There's not a lot else there. There's lots of mitochondria to help power it, but there's not a lot of other stuff going on. That's different than egg cells, right? Egg cells are going to carry most of that cytoplasm for the newly fertilized individuals. Okay, so most of the cytoplasm is not coming from sperm, it's coming from the egg cells, right? This is a very tightly packed in head of the sperm. Okay, there's not a lot of room for cytoplasm. That'd also be kind of a waste of energy to have to, power around all that cytoplasm. It'd be better off just being at the end goal, okay, as this thing is traveling through the female's reproductive tract. So as we already said, there's little to no cytoplasm. Most of the head of the sperm is just the haploid nucleus, right, where you've got the genetic information over here. You have the acrosome, which is at the very tip of it. It's a sac that contains enzymes on the top of the head for actually getting through to the egg. So when this thing arrives at an egg cell eventually, it needs to break through the outer layer of the egg cell. There's a protective layer, which we'll talk about. And this acrosome contains enzymes to help the sperm eventually get into the egg. The mid piece of it right here, where the tail is going to come out of, there are lots and lots of mitochondria, which you might realize, right? Those are to make energy. It's going to need a lot of energy to power this tail. It basically whips back and forth, okay? And my GIF down here doesn't work, but you can see this, okay, if you go look at the slides. It basically whips back and forth to power this thing, right? Then you've got the large tail, the flagellum, which is whip-like movements for propulsion to try to send it up the female's reproductive tract. Okay, so continuing on with our diagram here, the seminiferous tubules inside of the testis are going to arrive and form the epididymis. Okay, it's just this long folded tube here. Sperm then move from the epididymis to the vas deferens, which is this long, narrow tube, okay, that's going to eventually carry the sperm out of the scrotum and then eventually out of the body, okay, once it arrives to the urethra, right? So it's going to pass this way. You have about 100 million sperm produced each day that are stored in the vas deferens and epididymis. There's lots of sperm stored in the vas deferens and inside the epididymis. They're not all just stored down here. They're stored in these tubes as well. The vas deferens then joins the urethra, so it comes around back here. Okay, here's your bladder, and then these two are going to link together. So your vas deferens and urethra, okay, link up right here, which runs out of the tip of the penis and carries the sperm out of the body during ejaculation. So that is the tracing the path outward, right? It's got a little ways to go before it gets out. Semen is the fluid that will eventually arrive out of the penis. It's got about 5% sperm. It's not a lot of sperm. It's actually mostly other fluid, mixed with secretions from the seminal vesicles, prostate gland, and bulbourethral gland. So there's lots of stuff here being added to it as it is passing out. Okay, the seminal vesicles right here, so kind of at the very end of the vas deferens, they secrete about 60% of what is in semen. It's rich in fructose, which is sugar, right? And that would be there to help provide energy. You have the alkaline pH, so a slightly higher pH, to help protect it from the very acidic environment of the vagina and urine. Okay, so urine coming from the bladder here is not going to get and kill those sperm cells. It also contains something called prostaglandins, which cause uterine contractions and help the sperm move through the female's reproductive tract. So once it gets over to the female's reproductive tract, okay, that causes contractions of the uterus, which helps pull it up, right? It's going to go up into the tract. So those muscles will contract and pull the sperm into it. All right, the prostate gland is right here. It produces more alkaline fluid, so once again to help neutralize the acidic environment of the vagina. It's nutrient rich. Its secretion makes up about 30% of semen. So you've got 60% coming from the seminal vesicles, about 30% coming from the prostate. Okay. It also contains enzymes that increase the fluidity of semen after it is released into the vagina. So it's going to help turn it into a more liquidy consistency after a few minutes, right, which will allow it to swim better. Okay. And then you've got the bulbourethral gland, okay, down here. This is going to secrete alkaline mucus into the urethra before ejaculation, so it neutralizes urine and lubricates the urethra. So that way, as it's passing through here, it doesn't get stuck, okay? It is already lined, ready to be released. Okay, the female reproductive tract, it's got the ovaries and then accessory features to help bring the sperm to the egg. So you got the ovaries, structures that accept the sperm, structures that conduct the sperm to the egg, and structures that nourish the developing embryo, okay, if the egg has been fertilized. Egg development in the ovaries begins before birth. We've talked about that this year, that all of the eggs that a woman is ever going to have are already inside of her, okay, at birth. They develop before she is born, right, in utero. Oogenesis is the formation of egg cells. So this is going from an immature, what's called an oogonium, or oogonia for plural, and eventually arrives into a fully ready-to-go egg cell, mature egg cell that can accept a sperm and then get fertilized. Okay, so this begins in the developing ovaries of the female embryo. Oogonia, right? That's what's right here, is going to develop into the egg cell. So it's the first diploid cells that show up as early as the 6th week of development. In the 9 to 20th weeks, oogonia enlarge and differentiate into primary oocytes, right here. And by the 20th week, the primary oocytes have begun meiotic cell division. And it's going to suspend at prophase 1 until puberty. So it kind of gets right here and pauses, right? Okay, so we stop kind of at this point and wait until the female undergoes puberty. So basically, this is all happening in utero, right? Inside of the uterus, okay? While the unborn female, right, is still waiting to get born. Once the woman is born, right, she has all of her eggs, all of her lifetime supply of primary oocytes. It's roughly 1 to 2 million, and about 400,000 of those are remaining at puberty. Obviously, they're not going to need all of those during their lifetime. Okay, only certain ones are going to eventually develop. So you'll always have a few oocytes that are ready to undergo meiotic cell division during each cycle of a woman's reproductive span until menopause, at which point she has run out of oocytes, and that usually occurs around age 50, plus or minus a couple years in each direction. Okay, the ovary produces eggs, estrogen, and progesterone during the menstrual cycle. So that's where it's actually coming from, right, the ovary. In a mature ovary, each oocyte is surrounded by a layer of small cells. The oocyte plus those surrounding cells are called a follicle. You're going to hear that word quite a bit. The menstrual cycle, okay, the goal of it is to develop a follicle. So it's not just to have an egg cell ready, but have an egg cell plus the surrounding cells with it, right? Okay, the follicle, right, preparing that for fertilization. One other thing I should note here is that in order to have an unequal amount of cytoplasm and a lot more in the developed egg, the meiotic cell division here is uneven. So you're going to end up with what are called polar bodies. These just degenerate. Okay, these eventually just kind of disappear and break down because these cannot get fertilized, right? They don't have enough cytoplasm to actually grow into anything. So it's this egg cell is the only one that is good to go, right? It's different than men. All 4 of a man's sperm cells that are from a spermatogonia are going to develop into potential sperm cells. For women, they only get 1 egg cell, 1 good egg cell. The rest are these polar bodies that degenerate. So what's in charge of this whole cycle? Follicle development. Once a month, the hypothalamus is going to secrete gonadotropin, releasing hormone, right, GnRH. That's going to stimulate the anterior pituitary to release LH and FSH. FSH stimulates about 10 to 12 follicles to begin development. So they don't just make 1 egg cell. They're going to put several into the bucket there. They're only going to end up with 1 that fully develops, though. Okay, unless you end up with a situation where you are ovulating multiple eggs, and that can result in fraternal twins, right? So you have twins that are not identical. So those cells are going to go through nourishing process, right? The nourishing cells begin to multiply, release estrogen into the bloodstream. Only 1 of these will develop, though. So they, are going to lose a handful of them every time. Only 1 of them is going to fully develop. As the follicle develops, it secretes estrogen, which stimulates LH, luteinizing hormone production, that causes the primary oocyte to complete meiosis 1, dividing into a single secondary oocyte and the first polar body, right, which I kind of already mentioned. This uneven distribution of cytoplasm eventually results in 1 developed oocyte and 3 polar bodies that disintegrate. The secondary oocyte will not undergo meiosis 2 unless it is fertilized. Okay. Most of the accessory follicle cells remain in the ovary when the egg leaves and become the corpus luteum, which we'll see here, that secretes estrogen and progesterone. Okay, so outside of the ovary, which is responsible for the egg and all of the hormones, you've got the accessory parts here. So this is uterine tubes, uterus, and vagina. So the uterine tubes are oftentimes called the fallopian tubes, which is going to be this area in here, right? Here's your ovary, and here are the tubes, right? Okay. The opening is fringed with cilia called fimbriae. Okay, so there's basically little hair-like extensions, just like cilia, right, elsewhere, that help move the egg along, the ovulating egg. So the 1 egg that happens, right, it could be this ovary, it could be this ovary, but it only makes 1. Okay, so which one it is random, whether it's the left one or the right one, but only 1 per cycle. When it's released, it travels through the uterine tubes here. It's kind of pushed along, okay, by those cilia inside, those little hair-like extensions. The cilia eventually transport the egg, fertilized or unfertilized, to the uterus. So as it's moving here, where does it actually get fertilized? Okay, this GIF isn't currently working, but this sperm cell travels up the uterus here, and it meets the egg cell inside of the fallopian tube or uterine tube. This is where it actually gets fertilized. Once it's fertilized, it keeps, or unfertilized, right, if it doesn't happen, it keeps traveling down. If it's fertilized, it will implant itself into the woman's ovary somewhere. If it's not, it's going to eventually just come out, okay, all right, unfertilized, right? It never developed, okay? So the sperm travels up the female's reproductive tract here, up the uterus, into the uterine tubes, and meets the egg cell somewhere in here. If it is fertilized and that's successful, the egg, which is leaving the ovary, is going to continue to travel down, and then it will implant somewhere inside of the uterus here. The uterus's function is to nourish the developing embryo, so once it's implanted, and then eventually, with muscle contractions, to expel that child, right, to deliver the baby, okay? The wall has 2 layers, the endometrium, which is the inner lining, okay, that will form the mother's contribution to the placenta. The placenta is the structure that transfers oxygen, carbon dioxide, nutrients, and waste between the mother and the embryo. So you're probably familiar with that word, but that is going to be in there on the endometrium. The outer wall is called the myometrium, and its job is to start doing all the contractions that lead to childbirth, right? Pushing the baby out of the uterus. The cervix is this point right here, which is at the very bottom of the uterus. It closes off the uterus from the lower end, okay, down here into the vagina. It's a ring of connective tissues that encircles a tiny opening. It holds the developing baby in the uterus and expands during labor to deliver a child. So that little opening right there has to get big enough for a whole baby to come out of. Down below is the vagina, right? This serves as the receptacle for the penis and sperm and serves as the birth canal. So this is where it's going to receive sperm. The sperm will travel up the female's reproductive tract, maybe meet an egg here in the fallopian tube, and then implant into the walls of the uterus if it is successful. We're not going to get into every single detail here of the menstrual cycle, but there is, on average, a 28-day cycle, okay? And day 0 is the start of the menstrual period, okay? So if there is no successful pregnancy and the woman begins menstruation, that is day 0 of the cycle. So you can see that there's hormone levels throughout all of this here. You got FSH, estrogen, LH, right? Generally speaking, right, if this is day 0, okay, about day 14 is when you are going to be ovulating, plus or minus a few days in each direction, okay? And then day 28, right, if you are successful in achieving pregnancy, this cycle ends, right, and the baby goes on to implant and develop. If you are unsuccessful when it reaches day 28, okay, the female's body is going to realize, all right, well, that wasn't successful. It is time to start this process over again. And so it will clear out all of the blood and lining of that endometrium that was preparing to get pregnant. If it's not successful, it tears it all down and then starts to rebuild it back up. Right? So that's why you're bleeding during a period. It's this breaking up of the endometrium here. It's not just blood. It's blood and some soft tissue that's coming out, right? Now, the 28-day cycle here, that is on average. Some women will have longer cycles, some will have shorter cycles. Where they ovulate, it's oftentimes right there in the middle, right? So, if it's a 4-week cycle, it's usually right at the end of week 2 or start of week 3. But that can vary, right? It can be plus or minus a few days in each direction, so it's not a guarantee, okay? Like I said, if the egg is fertilized, it will implant on the blood vessel-rich tissue of the endometrium. If it does not occur, the cycle starts over. Estrogen and progesterone levels fall, and the endometrium disintegrates. So the endometrium, the lining of the uterus here, this is, pretending this was the base of the uterus. The lining grows bigger, 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 trying to, catch that fertilized egg cell. If that doesn't happen, right, it starts the process over again. The excess endometrial tissue is then expelled during the process of menstruation. So that's actually what's going on, right? If you were unsure of where's the blood coming from, what's actually bleeding, it is the lining of the uterus decides we weren't successful. It's time to clear this out and rebuild the line over again. If fertilization occurs, the embryo starts to secrete a luteinizing-like hormone called chorionic gonadotropin after implantation. Okay, this keeps the corpus luteum alive, and it secretes progesterone and estrogen for the first few months of pregnancy. And as you might be able to guess, this is also the hormone that they are testing for in the at-home pregnancy test, right? You've all seen those before. They are looking for chorionic gonadotropin, human HCG, so human chorionic gonadotropin specifically. That is what those at-home pregnancy tests are looking for. So if that shows up positive, that means that you are getting that hormone right in the urine, okay? So that's actually kind of an important one to know. Okay, for all this to occur, copulation must happen, right? Sperm must be deposited into the vagina. For males, this starts with an erection, right? This is where your arterioles dilate and fill with blood. They are going to enlarge, take up more space, and have more blood in them. You can see the difference between right the top here versus the bottom. After insertion to the vagina, movements stimulate receptors on the penis, triggering ejaculation. Okay, contractions of muscles around the epididymis, vas deferens, and urethra all propel semen through the reproductive tract to go through all those glands that we talked about: seminal, vesicle, prostate gland, bulbourethral gland. Okay, that's going to then push all of that through. For females, the role begins with an increased blood flow to the vagina, labia, and clitoris. So the labia is the external and interior folds protecting the vagina. The clitoris is at the top up here. It's a small structure above the vagina with many blood vessels and nerve endings. Stimulation there and other external structures may result in orgasm, though that's not necessary for fertilization, right? It only has to happen in males. It may help move, female orgasm may help move sperm up into the reproductive tract, so it may help pull it up into her body. So during fertilization, the sperm and the egg cell are going to unite. Okay. During intercourse, the penis releases that sperm into the vagina, at which point it begins to travel up through the cervix, up into the uterine wall, and entering the uterine tubes up here, searching for an egg, right? It could go left or right. It's got a 50-50 shot of guessing correctly, okay? Sperm may live for 2 to 4 days inside of a female reproductive tract. An unfertilized egg has about 24 hours of viability. So once it's released, it's got about 24 hours for sperm to get to it. If that doesn't happen, it is going to just pass on out and escape, okay? If copulation occurs within 1 to 2 days of ovulation, the sperm may meet an egg in one of the uterine tubes. So, copulation outside of that window is not going to result in pregnancy, but, you have to know when that window is, right? There's lots of ways to tell. But if you don't know when that window is, well, then you're kind of guessing as to whether or not that is going to happen. Right? So within 1 to 2 days of that ovulation puts you on track for potentially becoming pregnant. When the egg cell leaves the ovary, it's then surrounded by a whole bunch of cells called the corona radiata, which help form a barrier between the egg and the sperm. So you can see there's sperm cells here trying to get into the egg cell. There's a second barrier called the zona pellucida, and it stands for clear area, that lies between the corona radiata and the egg cell. So right in there, okay? Enzymes in the sperm's acrosome weaken these barriers and attempt to penetrate the egg. So if you don't have enough sperm, they can't actually put enough enzyme into this layer to break in. So even if one of them gets here, that's probably not good enough to actually achieve fertilization. You're going to need lots of sperm to actually help break down that layer, that outer layer, that corona radiata, with their enzymes in the acrosome. Okay, that's what it says right there. Roughly only 1 in 100,000 sperm that are deposited into the vagina actually reach the fallopian tube. They reach where the egg might be. And of those, only about 1 in 20 actually find the egg. So you have to get pretty lucky here, right? That's about 1 in 2 million chance to get there. And even still, about 50 of them make it or so to the egg, right? A few hundred sperm attack the barriers around the egg. So somewhere between 50 and a couple hundred arrive here, okay? When the sperm's head fuses with the egg's plasma membrane, so when one finally gets to the plasma membrane and breaks through that outer layer, a couple things happen. The vesicles near the surface of the egg release chemicals into the zona pellucida, okay, and prevent additional sperm from entering. So only one can actually make it inside. And then the egg undergoes a second division of meiosis, okay, which is going to then begin the process of development. So defects in either the male or female reproductive system can prevent fertilization, right? So that can be something like a blocked uterine tube, it's too small, or a man with a low sperm count. If not enough sperm can get to the egg, it can never actually penetrate the egg. It's estimated that between 15 to 20% of couples that are trying to conceive have fertility problems, right? It's defined as frequent unprotected sex for at least 1 year and attempting to conceive. So, I bring this up because 15 to 20% is like 1 in 5 to 1 in 6 couples are going to deal with this in their lifetime. So, if you get married someday, you may perhaps have to deal with this yourself. So just something to keep in mind, right? It's not uncommon. It is something a lot of people do have to deal with. There are ways to treat this, and there are ways to try to increase your odds of being successful. But do know that it's about 15 to 20% of all couples who are trying to conceive are just unable to do so, or it takes them a significantly longer amount of time.